If you enjoy compelling stories of love, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating content. My name is Meera, and I am a 29-year-old nanny. I come from a small village in India, a place where dreams often wither before they can bloom. For the longest time, I believed my life was destined to follow a predictable path. Marriage to a man my parents chose, a life spent raising children and tending to a household that was never truly mine. But I wanted more. 2 years ago, I arrived in the United States, filled with hope for a fresh start. I was hired by the Petersons, a wealthy family in New York, to take care of their 2 children, Sophie and Noah. The job seemed perfect, or so I thought. Laura, the mother, was kind and welcoming. Her husband, Michael, appeared distant at first, but polite. The children quickly grew attached to me, and I loved caring for them. But here I am, sitting alone in my small room, overwhelmed with guilt. I've been keeping a secret. One so dark that it gnaws at me every single day. I'm having an affair with Michael. Even as I write these words, my chest tightens with shame. Laura trusts me completely. She's praised me countless times for the care I provide to her children, for the meals I prepare, and for the way I've made their lives easier. And yet, I've betrayed her in the worst way possible. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't come here looking for this, but Michael has a way of making me feel seen, understood in a way no one ever has. And now, I'm trapped in a web of passion and deceit, unable to free myself, yet consumed by the weight of my actions. Every day, I tell myself it's time to stop, to walk away. But the thought of losing him, even though I know he's not truly mine, is unbearable. This secret affair has become both my greatest escape and my deepest regret. How did it come to this? How did I, a simple girl from India with dreams of a better life, end up here, hiding in the shadows of another woman's home? To understand, you have to know how it all began. Before we dive into the story, if you enjoy compelling stories of love, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating content. When I first arrived in the United States, everything felt overwhelming. The air was colder, sharper than anything I'd ever felt back home, and the streets seemed impossibly wide. I had never been away from my family before, and as I stepped out of the airport into the chaos of taxis and hurried strangers, I felt a pang of doubt. What was I doing here, thousands of miles away from the only life I'd known? The Petersons were waiting for me when I arrived at their grand house in New York. It was a sprawling home with white columns, manicured lawns, and large windows that seemed to sparkle even in the weak winter sun. Laura was the first to greet me, a tall, elegant woman in her late 30s. She hugged me warmly and said, "We're so happy you're here, Meera." Her words, though simple, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. Michael appeared a moment later, carrying their youngest child, Sophie, on his hip. He smiled, a brief but genuine expression, and extended his free hand. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and steady. The children, Sophie and Noah, were charming from the start. Sophie was 3, with curly blonde hair and a mischievous grin, while Noah, at 6, was quieter, always clutching a book or some toy he wouldn't share. They seemed to take to me immediately, following me around as I unpacked and peppering me with questions about where I came from and whether I knew how to bake cookies. The first few weeks were a blur of adjusting to my new life. I spent my days caring for the children, preparing their meals, and keeping the house in order. Laura was busy with her career and social commitments, often leaving early and coming back late. Michael, on the other hand, worked from home more often than I'd expected. He had a home office on the 2nd floor, and though he kept to himself, I couldn't help but notice his presence. At first, I didn't think much of him. He was polite but distant, always immersed in work or distracted by his phone. He wasn't overly involved with the children, though he seemed to love them in his own way. I thought he was just another busy American father, preoccupied with providing for his family. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice things. The way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the lingering glances when we passed each other in the hallway, the way he would ask about my day even when Laura was around. At first, I dismissed it as harmless kindness. It wasn't until one evening, months after I'd settled into the job, that I started to feel a shift. I had just put the children to bed and was cleaning up the kitchen when Michael walked in. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, his dark hair slightly tousled as though he'd been running his hand through it. "You don't have to do all that," he said, gesturing to the dishes I was scrubbing. "It's part of my job," I replied with a smile, though my hands trembled slightly as I worked. He leaned against the counter, watching me for a moment. "Still," he said, "you do more than enough around here. Laura and I are lucky to have you." Something in his tone made me pause. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't the polite attention of an employer. It was something else entirely. I finished the dishes quickly and excused myself, retreating to my room. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind, the way his voice had softened, the way his eyes had lingered on mine. From that night on, things began to shift between us in ways I hadn't anticipated. Michael found more reasons to be near me, asking about my day, offering help with tasks that didn't require his involvement, or simply lingering in the kitchen while I worked. At first, I told myself it was harmless, but as days turned into weeks, the subtle tension between us became undeniable. One evening, when the house was unusually quiet, I was folding laundry in the living room. Laura was out at a charity dinner, and the children were fast asleep. I heard his footsteps behind me and turned to see him standing in the doorway. Dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly messy, he seemed different, somehow more approachable, more human. "You're still working?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "It's just laundry," I replied with a brief smile. He stepped closer and perched on the armrest of the couch. "You don't have to do it all, Meera. You already do so much for us." "I don't mind," I said, though his words stirred something inside me. For a moment he was silent, simply watching me fold clothes. Then, almost hesitantly, he said, "You're incredible with the kids. They adore you." I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks and focused on the clothes in my hands. "Thank you, they're wonderful children," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. "And you've made our lives so much better. I don't know how we managed before you came." Something about the way he said it made my heart race. I glanced up at him, and for a moment our eyes met. Neither of us moved, the air between us thick with unspoken emotions. "Michael," I started, but before I could finish, he leaned forward and kissed me. The kiss wasn't hesitant. It was filled with longing, with emotions we had both suppressed for far too long. For a split second, I froze, my mind screaming at me to stop. But then, something inside me gave in, and I kissed him back. The laundry fell from my lap, forgotten, as he pulled me closer. His hands were warm and steady on my waist, holding me like I was something precious. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, I couldn't bring myself to look at him. My heart was pounding, and a wave of guilt crashed over me. "We can't do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, but the look in his eyes told a different story. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I threw myself into my duties, hoping the routine would dull the ache of confusion and guilt, but Michael's presence seemed inescapable. He found reasons to linger, a question about the children's schedules, a casual remark about dinner, or a quiet moment in the hallway when no one else was around. Every interaction felt charged, every glance a reminder of the night we crossed a line we could never uncross. One evening, as I was tidying up the playroom after putting the children to bed, he appeared in the doorway again. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the faintest trace of tension in his posture. "You've had a long day," he said softly, stepping inside. "Let me help." I shook my head, trying to focus on the toys scattered across the floor. "It's fine, I've got it." But he knelt beside me, picking up a stuffed animal. "I insist," he murmured. Our hands brushed as we reached for the same toy, and the electric jolt that followed left me breathless. I pulled back quickly, clutching the toy as though it were a lifeline. "Michael, we can't," I began, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression earnest and filled with something I couldn't quite name. "I know this is complicated, Meera. I know it's wrong, but I can't pretend that I don't feel something when I'm around you." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. "It's not fair to anyone," I whispered. "Not to Laura, not to the kids, not to us." He reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. "I never meant for this to happen, but it's there. I can't ignore it, and I don't think you can either." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The weight of his words, the truth of our situation, hung heavily in the air between us. I wanted to run, to escape the pull of emotions that threatened to consume me. But I stayed, frozen in the moment, unable to look away from him. Before I could say anything, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. It was different this time, slower, deeper, as if he was savoring every moment. From that point on, there was no going back. Our affair began in earnest, filled with stolen moments and whispered secrets. We would meet in the early hours of the morning when Laura and the children were asleep, or during the brief times when the house was empty. Each time felt more dangerous than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. Michael had a way of making me feel alive, of making me forget the loneliness I had carried with me for so long. But even in the midst of our passion, I couldn't escape the nagging guilt that followed me everywhere. As much as I tried to ignore it, the weight of what we were doing was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, and yet I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Living this double life became both thrilling and exhausting. By day, I was the attentive nanny, playing with Sophie and Noah, helping them with their homework, and ensuring the household ran smoothly. By night, I was someone entirely different, a woman caught in a whirlwind of forbidden passion. Michael and I became experts at hiding our affair. We avoided eye contact when Laura was around, kept our conversations brief and casual, and ensured our stolen moments were behind locked doors or during times we knew no one would disturb us. One afternoon, while Laura was at her yoga class, Michael and I found ourselves alone in the house. I was organizing the children's toys in the playroom when he walked in, quietly shutting the door behind him. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low but teasing. "I haven't," I replied quickly, though we both knew it wasn't true. He stepped closer, the intensity in his gaze making my heart race. "Meera, you don't have to feel guilty every time you look at me." I looked away, my hands fumbling with a stack of building blocks. "Laura doesn't deserve this," I whispered. "And what about what I deserve?" he countered, his voice softer now. "I've been happier these past few months than I have in years. That's because of you." I didn't know how to respond to that. His words made my chest tighten with both guilt and longing. Before I could think of what to say, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing my skin. "Meera," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." It was moments like these that made it impossible for me to walk away. When he looked at me like that, when he spoke to me in that quiet, heartfelt way, I felt like I was the only person in the world who mattered to him. But the reality of our situation was never far from my mind. Every time I saw Laura laughing with her children or thanking me for taking care of them, the guilt hit me like a wave. I started to question everything. My choices, my feelings, even my worth. How could I betray someone who had shown me nothing but kindness? And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop. Our secret moments grew more frequent and more daring. There were stolen kisses in the kitchen when the children were playing outside, whispered conversations late at night when everyone else was asleep, and even a few brief encounters in his car when Laura was out running errands. One night, after the children were in bed, Michael and I sat together in his office, the door locked to ensure no one would walk in. He poured us each a glass of wine, something he rarely did, and we sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "Do you ever regret this?" he asked, his voice quiet. I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. "Every day," I admitted, "but that doesn't mean I want it to end." He reached for my hand, his fingers threading through mine. "Neither do I," he said softly. The weight of his words stayed with me long after I left his office that night. As much as I wanted to believe that what we had was real, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The guilt was like a shadow, always lurking, always there. No matter how much Michael tried to reassure me, I couldn't silence the voice in my head that reminded me of the betrayal I was committing every single day. Laura's kindness only made it worse. She often told me how much she appreciated me, how lucky they were to have me in their lives. Her trust in me felt like a knife twisting deeper with every moment I spent with her husband. One quiet afternoon, Lisa and I were sitting in the living room while the children napped. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping tea, and suddenly looked up at me with a warm smile. "Meera," she said warmly, "you've been such a blessing to this family. I don't know how we managed before you came." Her words, meant as a compliment, hit me like a blow. I forced a smile, mumbling "thank you," but inside I felt like I was crumbling. How could I look her in the eye, knowing what I was doing behind her back? That evening, I stayed in my room longer than usual, avoiding Michael's attempts to draw me into conversation. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Lisa's words in my mind. Was it worth it? Was the passion and connection I felt with Michael worth the betrayal of a woman who had treated me like family? But when Michael knocked on my door later that night, all my resolve melted away. He stood there, his expression serious, and without a word stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I know you're upset," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It's not right," I blurted, my voice trembling. "What we're doing, it's wrong, Michael. Lisa doesn't deserve this. The kids don't deserve this." He reached for my hand, his touch sending a familiar warmth through me. "I know it's complicated, Meera, but us, it feels right to me." His words were like a balm to my guilt. soothing me even as they added to the turmoil inside me. I wanted to believe him, to believe that what we had was something more than just a fleeting affair, but the weight of what we were doing was becoming too much to bear. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, trying to create distance between us. I avoided being alone with Michael, ignored his texts, and kept my interactions with him as brief as possible. But it was like trying to hold back the tide. No matter how much I tried to resist, I couldn't escape the pull he had on me. One evening, as the children played outside under Laura's watchful eye, I found myself alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Michael entered, his presence filling the room with a familiar tension. He leaned against the counter, watching me as I chopped vegetables. "Meera, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious but gentle. I paused, knife hovering above the cutting board. "Michael, not now. Laura and the kids are just outside." "That's exactly why we need to talk," he insisted, stepping closer. "This isn't sustainable. The secrecy, the guilt, it's tearing you apart. I see it in your eyes every day." His words struck a chord, and I turned to face him, my hands trembling. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't feel it every second I'm here?" My voice cracked, and I fought to keep my emotions in check. Michael's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "Then let's figure it out. Together. I can't stand to see you like this, Meera. You mean too much to me." I pulled my hand away, the weight of his words too much to bear. "And what about them?" I asked, gesturing toward the window where Laura and the children were visible, their laughter carrying into the room. "What happens to them if they find out? What happens to us?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. I can't lose you." The raw honesty in his voice left me speechless. For a moment we stood there, the unspoken truths between us heavier than ever. The sound of the children's laughter faded into the background as the reality of our situation hung in the air. I turned back to the cutting board, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand, but the tension between us remained palpable. It was a moment that changed everything, leaving me more conflicted than ever. I said softly, "we're hurting people who don't deserve it." For the first time, I saw something close to vulnerability in his eyes. "Meera," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to let you go." I looked away, tears stinging my eyes. "Maybe it's time we figure out how." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I avoided Michael as much as possible, pouring all my energy into caring for Sophie and Noah. But even as I tried to move on, the weight of our affair lingered, a constant reminder of the lines we had crossed. One evening, Laura asked me to sit with her while the children played outside. She poured us both a cup of tea and said, "You've been quieter lately. Is everything okay?" For a moment, I thought about telling her the truth. The words hovered on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "I've just been a little tired, nothing to worry about." She nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "You work so hard, Meera. If you ever need anything, just let me know." Her kindness made my guilt feel unbearable. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep betraying Laura and pretending everything was fine. The next morning, I wrote a resignation letter. I didn't explain the real reason for my departure. How could I? Instead, I told Laura that I needed to return to India to take care of my aging parents. When I handed her the letter, she looked shocked. "Meera, are you sure? Is there anything we can do to help?" "No," I said, forcing a smile. "This is something I have to do." Michael didn't say much when he found out I was leaving. He cornered me in the hallway one last time, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Is this really what you want?" he asked. "It's what I need," I replied, my voice firm. The day I left, Laura hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. Sophie and Noah clung to me, begging me to stay, and it took everything in me not to break down. Michael stood by the door, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. As the taxi pulled away from the house, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I knew I was making the right choice, but it didn't make the pain any less real. Even now, as I sit in my tiny apartment far away from the Petersons, I still think about them. I wonder if Laura ever suspected anything, if Michael has moved on, if Sophie and Noah remember me. But more than anything, I wonder if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did for the love I stole, the trust I betrayed, and the life I left behind.